My party trick is you tell me what your favorite movie was growing up, and I tell you how it relates to who you are today.
Oh wow!
I really want to play.
I've known you for a long time. I've never done this.
We are going to save this for on air. That's for sure.
All right. So Mad Max, Road Warrior. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, I like that movie. All right, today on The Media Mindset, we're joined by an old friend of mine, Natalie Sportelli, someone who I've known to be a content pro for a number of years. Natalie, thanks so much for joining us today. And if you wouldn't mind, just give the listeners a little background on who you are and kind of how your career has evolved.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about content today. I talk about content all the time, and you two are really smart in this space, so I'm excited to see what we all have to say. So I started my career in journalism, and I worked at Forbes for 2.5 years. I was an English major at Colgate University, so kind of a liberal arts, writing background, reading all the time, and I knew I wanted to be someone who told stories and someone who told other people's stories, and thinking about like what's the most interesting thing about this topic. So when I was at Forbes, I worked on 30 Under 30, working closely with founders and kind of sourcing what people were doing in different industries, and I felt so inspired by them. They were hustlers and they were working really hard and they cared so much about what they were doing, and I couldn't really imagine having that much motivation and drive around kind of a mission and a project. So I knew when I wanted to move on from Forbes, which I had been editing Under 30 and writing about startups, writing about founders, that I wanted to work more closely with founders, but it was super important to me that I was continually writing, producing content on social, kind of being a voice and sharing other people's stories and kind of building my own narrative. So I looked into venture capital, I looked into accelerators and incubators. I didn't feel ready to join a startup just yet because I felt like it was gonna be a really big jump from kind of a really traditional media company to a startup. So I joined a venture capital firm just over a year ago, 2 Novembers ago, and I started as their content and brand manager. So the way I think about that is anything that is written about us and the way we talk about ourselves. So part of my role is firm facing, and then part of it is portfolio facing. So that means I help our founders think about their messaging and their mission, what's most interesting about what they're doing, what will the outside world want to hear from them. If you're a technical founder and you're like a kind of nerdy engineering person, you might not have a full sense of like how to tell your story. So I really love diving in and talking with founders about that. Firm-wise, in our content and building our brand out, it's about telling our story, why we help founders succeed, what makes companies successful, and managing content for Lear Hippo means making sure that we're seeing the deals that we want to see, and it's coming from really top tier founders because we're seen as a really smart brand in the space that's already been sharing knowledge, and they get to know us before they even come into the office because of the content and brand that we produce. So I really love my job, and I have a really great team with a talent manager and a director of platform who runs events, which is also part of my job, which I'm sure we can get into later. But it's been quite an experience transferring from journalism to content for businesses.
So as someone who went from a more traditional journalism background to working straight in the startup space, there were a lot of things that personally for me years ago were very jarring. And seeing it from the other perspective, instead of receiving PR emails, sending PR emails, doing things like that, it was a big shift, and I kind of had to rewire. I felt like my brain had to rewire. And sometimes it felt almost like painful to kind of relearn these things from the other perspective. What surprised you most making that jump or that transition?
I think the learning curve for joining venture capital to begin with is pretty steep. There's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of new things you learn. I'm kind of still learning new words. I just learned what JAKK was the other day. And so as you kind of grow in whatever career you are, you pick things up as you go. The biggest difference between what I was doing at Forbes and what I'm doing now is that journalism, you don't really want to read the reader to a conclusion. You want to be objective and offer all sides, be thoroughly researched so they walk away with an impression of something. Content for businesses is about getting a message across, but also being super helpful and talking to your audience, right? So a reporter does what they do because they're telling stories, they're building a beat, they're building their reputation, they're building their subject matter knowledge. That's kind of similar to what businesses are doing because they're building subject matter knowledge. They want people to come to them for things. So in the way that you draw in a readership, they're very similar. but they're very different in terms of how people go about it and the mission and message. If your mission in publishing content as a business is to drive sales or convert customers, then you have an agenda, right? So journalism it's not supposed to have an agenda. So what I'm doing now is thinking through strategy in a way that what can we produce that's really helpful in different buckets. So one of our series is a talent series where I worked with our talent manager to develop what's a really interesting content thread for her to kind of pull on so people will see her as an expert in that space and send us really great candidates for our startups. And in that series, she interviews really top quality, high level execs at our startups. And then kind of talks about how do you hire for that role? What makes you successful in that role? What should people know about going into that position? So the agenda there is saying, we help our startups find and hire really amazing talent. We're producing content to help any founder hire for this role. And here's one person in our portfolio. So it kind of checks a lot of boxes. And I think I've been thinking a lot more strategically about why we're making things versus when I was at Forbes, I'd write about a company I just thought was interesting. And outside of a personal benefit for the business and the brand and me, there wasn't an agenda.
Gotcha.
What is the overall goal of if you're Larry Hippo and you're trying to tell your story to the world? I've seen different VCs do it very different ways. Why did you guys choose to approach it the way you did? I read one I read is AVC by Fred Wilson, which a lot of people read, and that's obviously a very personal, his take on many different things. From what you just described, it's a little more intentional around certain topics. So what's really driving the goals behind your content creation as a firm?
Yeah, so I think there were firms that have done a really amazing job with content for a really long time. So First Round was really the leader in content and content marketing from a really early outset. So they're definitely still the bar, to try to meet. I think things like AVC, both sides of the table, individual blogging from individual investors is super important. They're speaking as themselves on behalf of the company. When I think about our content strategy, I'm thinking about the same thing. I'm talking about how are our investors talking about what they're doing in relation to the company, and then what's the company talking about. So I can publish a post on my own Medium, or one of our investors can publish a post on his own Medium that's representing what he's talking about in that specific sector. But what are we saying from Larry Hippo is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. You're someone who, and we talked a little bit before we started recording today about how you're a fan of brands having a personal perspective, or at least having a side, taking a side on certain things. That can be a tricky subject. I mean, we saw that in an earlier podcast we recorded. We brought up the subject of Nike and with Colin Kaepernick, how they clearly took a side or took a stance on a hot button social issue. So, that is certainly something that can be very powerful and impactful for a brand. It's not without its risks, though, especially when it comes to alienating potential customers. Brands have an agenda. They want customers. Michael Jordan famously said, Republicans buy sneakers too, that kind of thing. How do you work with founders and brand storytellers to balance having a perspective, taking an authentic voice, or having an authentic voice with, the fact that sometimes that can be alienating?
So I think the best example to put in really common terms is if you're on Twitter and you see Wendy's saying something super funny or weird, it's because they're trying to get attention and they're trying to say something different. So if you're not a brand that's kind of going to go into people's mentions on Twitter and just start saying funny things and start building what you're known for there, you want to stand out. So how can brands stand out outside of just talking about what they do? It's talking about what people care about. So if you're a brand and you're a founder, like Patagonia, for instance, that used all of its tax incentives to, I think, do carbon offsets, right? You're aligning yourself with the mission. And if you're like Nike, you know your customers so well that you're not going to marginalize them in this message. So the people who are most upset about the Gillette ad or, people coming out or brands coming out and saying, taking a stance on something, they weren't necessarily the customer they were trying to reach anyway. So outside of, saying something different, getting attention, and putting something out there that for good or bad is different and takes a stand on something, is building affinity with people who already use your brand. And then the people who don't use it, you probably weren't reaching them anyway. You're not trying to convert customers by taking a stand on an issue. You are aligning yourself further with your customers. So when Bumble says something like, we're outlawing this on the app, or Serena Williams says this about this personal issue or this brand, and someone is a person, someone's a brand, someone's a business, they're only creating like more affinity around those customers they're already talking to, and they're creating awareness around other customers. So I think it's definitely risky for early stage startups to come out with a cause or a mission if it's not baked into their company. So if you're like a sustainable personal care brand, it's part of what you're building. But if you're like a fitness company or someone that's coming out saying, we really believe in like the oceans, and there's not like a super correlated thing, I think it's a little bit riskier there than if it's baked into your mission from the outset.
I know you're very familiar with a lot of startups around New York. Are there any that you think do really well? Like a lot of the examples we said are really big companies that have teams of people that think through this, and the challenge of a startup is just a couple of people often that maybe aren't even experts in this type of thing, trying to pull it off. So do you think anyone, any honorable mentions of people that you've interacted with or brands you've seen?
So one trend I'm seeing among startups, and this is a way that I think they're building more authenticity around what they're doing outside of blog posts, is online magazines. So Casper, for instance, has an online magazine, and they've done a really great job building out content around what they're doing. And so I think they're doing a great job. Anytime that a consumer-facing company or B2B company is investing in content, they're thinking about how to like legitimize their voice, and that takes a lot of testing and a lot of exploring. So when a startup gets to a place where they have a content team versus one marketing manager who's doing social and doing PR and doing blog posts when they can, that's not going to set into motion like a very strong content strategy from the beginning. And the reason why content works and converts and is helpful to people is when it's consistent. You can't just publish a blog post and then walk away for a month. This is why you need to hire someone pretty early to set it in place. But I would say Casper's doing a great job. A non-startup, I think, is American Express. Does a really great job syndicating content. They have a partnership with The Infatuation where they're producing content around certain topics or food moments in the city. And so I think the more creative, bigger brands can be, the better for them, kind of as they're thinking about being innovative. Startups that are doing a really great job with content are super devoted to it and have built out real meaningful products like these online magazines.
American Express is one that I've been following. American Express Open and the content they started doing, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago. They started using these like small business stories and really giving a human voice behind the content they were producing. That kind of shocked me because I didn't know much about the credit card industry, and I was kind of like, or the finance in general, and I was like, wow, this big kind of scary legacy brand that I'd only heard much older people talk about at the time, they're producing like really human content. That surprised me, and I think we've seen them really lead that industry, and a lot of other companies, a lot of their competitors have followed suit. Are there any other industries, could be ones you interacted with at Forbes, could be in your current role, where you're like, wow, that industry is telling really, really good stories, and I maybe wouldn't have expected that?
I think one area that involves a lot of education right now is regulated spaces. So we just invested in a CBD company, and they're pouring a ton of energy into their content because there's so much education around it. So I would say that really interesting industries building this out right now that maybe are unexpected would be any of these more regulated spaces. So if Lime were to really invest in what micromobility means for the future of cities or urban development or anything like that, and then CBD and spaces where people are still really learning about the impact of what this product does and these companies do. I think that maybe people would not want to shy away from something like that, but you would want to go all in early to educate about why you've created this business and what it means to convert customers sooner. So anything that kind of involves more education, I think, is doing a really good job.
Cool.
So can you talk more? Lair Hippo, I know, has a lot of investments over the years. Some very successful companies, some newer ones just starting out. So how do you interact with these brands in your portfolio to help them? Is it like, I know you do some events to address a lot of people. Is there like one-on-one attention you'll pay? How does that all work from Lair Hippo's perspective?
Yes, so we have really good examples from our portfolio of content working. So we invested in Glossier, which started as a beauty blog, and she's built it into an empire. It's super successful. And I think we can point to that as an example of what content and creating a community very early can do. I work with our portfolio founders and also functional leaders in a couple different ways. I host monthly workshops. So at thinking like a startup, my team is always thinking, how can we scale what we're doing? And what that means is I can have a 30-minute coffee or phone call and talk through content strategy, hiring, like what kind of messaging you should go out with, how to handle a rebrand, anything that might be a content moment for a company. But if I can scale that in a better way by writing internal content, which I do, I'll post once a month on really tactical things like how to stay in the news when there's no news. We're thinking about, could you make an original survey? Could you write about data you collect from your customers? How can you create content and news around what you're doing yourself, right? So the internal documents that I write, and then monthly workshops. This week we hosted an Influencer Marketing 101 workshop. We've also hosted roundtables. We had a roundtable of PR leaders. We had a content development strategies workshop, and next month we're doing a how to make the most of your content marketing. We host a ton of things for our founders. So what I'm really focused on is helping the functional leaders, the marketing people, the CMOs, the content managers, the social media managers in helping them succeed. And that's through this internal content and these workshops and then these meetups. So outside of the coffee and the phone calls, this kind of programming, and then also monthly office hours where just block off 2 hours every Thursday, first Thursday of the month. Who wants to talk to me? I have this time set aside for you. And that reminder is really important that they come to me. I'm here to talk, as kind of to scale an effort over time.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of a random tangent, but you're putting together these events. You have startup founders of all different backgrounds in New York City. What kind of food do you order for that group?
I thought it was really funny. This influencer marketing workshop, I ordered avocado toast. I asked Twitter, which is my sounding board for all ideas, if a bagel bar or avocado toast was more Instagram-y, influencer-y, and they picked avocado toast. So we went with Dr. Smoot avocado toast and chia puddings and stuff. So I thought I was clever.
Do you outsource a lot of your event planning decisions to Twitter?
Only food-related ones. I feel like they want to weigh in on that.
Influencer marketing. It's something that I've personally seen a lot of brands, especially in very particular niche spaces, kind of fall flat on. And I feel like it's something people are getting honestly a little bit tired of, because we've seen it. It's not new anymore. Having someone on Instagram push out a product in an organic seeming post, it's kind of old hat at this point, and I feel like social users are they're on to that, right? What do you think the next evolution of influencer marketing is going to look like, and how is that going to manifest on platforms?
So people have definitely gotten much smarter to recognizing what's a hashtag spawn and hashtag ad. We've all seen it. So one thing I think is going to evolve in the next year is a lot more participation from the influencers. People in the industry call them creators, around the content itself. So before, where companies would have maybe full say and approval over what content is pushed out by the influencer, more content, I think, in the next year will be there will be more participation from actually the influencer creator in it, because if it feels like something is staged from a company, it's going to feel more sponsored versus this is the natural way that I would interact with this for my feed already. So I think that's one trend, giving more creative control to the influencer who knows their audience probably better. And then nano and micro influencers. So I think if you're a startup and you're a smaller company, you don't want to pay a ton of money for they call them megawatt influencers, millions of followers, right? If you can make a really good, well-aligned partnership with a nano influencer, 5,000 to 10,000, that can really convert in a meaningful way, because they have a really loyal following that might not be bots and brands that are just real organic people. So I think we'll see more of that. But also I think brands need to make sure they're approaching it in the right way. like anyone who's just sending a DM in like kind of a non-professional context to a nano influencer, like you're kind of giving up whatever bargaining rights you are by just like making it kind of less professional. Maybe, some influencers prefer to operate in DMs, but if you have millions of followers, like you probably want to be a little bit more professional about business inquiries, go here, press to whatever. I think the professionalism around it will probably continue to develop, and then nano and micro and more participatory content.
So I have a question. If I'm under the 500 followers on Instagram, what's below nano influencers? Is it like pico influencers? How low does it go here?
Probably just David Tao.
Okay, yeah,
That's it.
cool. We can workshop that after. I'm just trying to go
No
through.
peers.
Yeah.
Fearless influencer. Business. I'll be your business manager.
Yeah,
That'll work out.
inquiries.
Yeah. All inquiries to me.
I'm going to add the inquiries to my bio right after this.
We were talking about Activate, a cool brand in New York that you guys invested in as well, which is a way to reach a lot of these influencers. I think they have some big and small on their platform. And I know they're a big push into analytics as well. Are the brands at a point where they're trying to measure the influence of influencers, or is it still kind of influencers do whatever they want and, impact be gone, which I know it was like that 3-4 years ago. You had 1 million followers, you kind of did whatever you wanted, and, no one wanted to measure. But do brands care about measuring that impact now, or do you advise them to?
I think yes. What's really hard though, you can see a direct conversion from an ad. Easy, right? Okay, swipe up, link, tracked, whatever, push this, whatever. Awareness is very different. So if I look at Instagram and I see an influencer and I see a brand, I don't need to make that purchase now, but that awareness could mean that if I'm in a store and 2 months later, I see that brand, I know about it because of that. So I think the direct conversion is helpful, but it's not a perfect metric because measuring awareness is via impressions, but you can't really dive into how those impressions will relate to purchasing power over time. So I might look at my Instagram and see, a brand that I like, but I don't want to buy something in that moment, so maybe it'll happen later. But I do think there's a higher expectation around analytics because it's more expensive and it's more becoming more of a business. So you want to see that you're putting money into something that is converting or is at least measuring more for you, so you know how to test it in new ways.
I'm curious if you've spotted any differences between, I know you're someone who's very connected to the New York City food scene, for example. You always seem to know kind of the hottest new place to go. I get major FOMO from your Instagram stories. When it comes to local marketing or geo-targeted marketing, how are you seeing that play out differently when it comes to content and storytelling, as opposed to a brand that's trying to have national or even international appeal?
So I'm seeing a lot more of this because we've invested more recently in kind of retail locations, like real estate buys. One of our companies is called Heyday, and so they just recently opened in LA. It's like a dry bar for facials. So in thinking about regional markets and going to places where you haven't been before, partnerships I think are a really big deal. So if you're launching in a new market and someone is pre-established there, do an event together and then kind of get your product in front of people that know about this analogous industry or this other company where it might be a really good fit. So if I'm a CPG food brand and I'm launching nationally, but I want to, be in stores in LA, or I'm now in Whole Food locations in LA, can you host a dinner and have product or something there? I think partnerships are a really big deal. Activations are a really big deal. Anything that's experiential in any kind of company. I mean, media companies have 29 Rooms has done an amazing job, and this is a media company, right? So with local geo-marketing and communities and driving new markets, it's getting people together in those areas where you can create more awareness and have them care about you more if there's a pre-existing relationship in a partnership or sponsors or something that's going to drive it. That's going to help you with that promotion, because if this brand is launching in this city, people aren't necessarily going to already know about you. So how can you, outside of doing a local press push, hope to create that awareness? And I think it's the correct partnerships.
What are the New York restaurants who's been influencing you? That's the question.
You can give the real answers off camera and off
Yeah.
mic, and, you know, but the ones you don't want to
Give
like
us the ones-
drive the crowd to.
Yeah, I mean,
So I love The Infatuation. They're really amazing people, just really good quality, awesome team. And they've done an amazing job for this food scene. And I actually, last night, went to a restaurant that was recommended to me by their editor-in-chief, who's awesome. And it was a sustainable omakase sushi restaurant with 8 seats. And they have 2 seatings, and they're open 5 days a week. And it was amazing. So it was all kind of fish that you don't usually see on menus because they aren't overfishing when they're catching trouts and bass and oysters from certain areas. So it was really good.
There's something I'm really trying to get into, and there's a restaurant in New Haven, Connecticut that's really famous for this called Mia's. It's a sushi restaurant that specializes in invasive species.
Cool.
So like lionfish from the Gulf of Mexico, Asiatic carp from like the Mississippi River and that area.
We actually asked for lionfish last night.
Really?
He said it's not the season.
I learned that lionfish has a season that I learned right now. But I really want to, like, I might make a trip up there just for that at some point, because I am really big into the idea of like eating invasive species as a positive for the environment.
Sure, that's good.
Yeah. Because that's a way for me to make a difference. Just eat more of something.
You're saving the world again.
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
I ate a lot of fish that there are more of them. Last night. Like this one porgy is not going to depopulate the porgy population. So it was fun.
Right.
So you mentioned before that you have a party trick, and
Yes.
you use it to kind of like analyze people. So what is it? And maybe we could give a test of it.
So my party trick is asking what movie was your favorite, like during your kind of formative years, like adolescence, and then seeing how it relates to what I know about you today. So
Very
hit
interesting.
me.
Kenny, you're up first.
Mine.
She knows you less. She knows you less.
I know
well.
you
Me less. Yeah, we just met today, so this will be interesting.
Yeah.
So mine is Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit. That's the one I would watch on repeat
Okay.
for many years. Me and my sister.
So you and your sister watched this.
Yes.
So what this tells me about you is that you kind of like rally the troops. So like if you're gonna go into a meeting and like kind of get people ready to go, like you're gonna be the person that is like encouraging people, kind of motivating people, solving problems and kind of creating like morale around an issue.
This is fun.
This
I like
is,
it.
wow, that was like, I wasn't exactly sure how that would manifest.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
That was
You're
really
really good
good.
at that. Yeah, I mean, totally, 100%.
All right.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
let's hear yours.
I'm like a little like trepidatious though. Now I'm like analyzing, because I made my choice right after you told me you could do this. I made my choice, and I'm like, I'm sticking with it, right? So,
Okay.
The Nightmare Before Christmas. That was like, I still watch it a couple times a year.
a couple times a year. That's a Christmas movie.
It's also a Halloween movie.
Okay.
I mean, it's about the range of holidays. So there's never a time when you're really, it's always
There's
kind
no
of appropriate.
season.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound so judgmental.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah. So Jack Skellington, one of my childhood heroes. Anyway.
Okay.
All right, so what that tells me about you is that when you get really excited about something, you like evangelize it. So like if you discover a product or a service or a thing or like an idea for a company or like something to work on, you bring it back to people and you have a lot of energy and you're pitching it. You're like, guys, we're gonna do this and it's gonna be really great and like I'm excited about it and this is why it's gonna work.
Like Jack Skellington when he discovered Christmas.
Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 for 2.
Wow, that was really
Now-
cool.
What is your favorite movie, and what does that tell us about you?
My favorite.
So you just self-analyze.
Just self-analyze.
It's like quite the rabbit hole.
We can't do it, so.
My favorite movie from growing up was Devil Wears Prada. And what that tells me about me is that I believe in self-delegation and that I'm the best person to do whatever job that I'm given. And even if I'm giving myself my own job, I have whatever standards I have for it. And so I'm the Miranda Priestley of my inbox and my life. And that's kind of what I'm striving for.
That got really meta because
Yeah.
we just asked you to analyze yourself, and your self-analysis relates to self-motivating.
Self thinks that it was good.
That's a really good trick.
That's a really good one.
It's a really good
I
trick.
need to come up with a party trick that I can do just via audio. That'd be like a good thing just to have in the back
That
pocket.
would be useful.
Yeah, for like conference calls.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Party trick for conference
Every
calls.
conference call.
David, do the
All right,
thing.
David, do your thing. Yeah.
Maybe for another recording.
Do you have one in mind that have you been working on this? Is this staged?
I do a decent Batman voice, like Christian Bale as Batman, but I'm not gonna.
Okay.
I'm still workshopping it.
Are you gonna do like a Bane? I'm not gonna do it.
I can't do the Tom Hardy
it.
Bane. That's like a whole.
I'm not doing it. But like caller one has joined, but in a Bane voice.
More Christian Bale, like gravelly Batman. That's what I'm working on. Working toward it. I'll bust it out during a podcast, and you'll know.
Is it like too gravelly or not gravelly enough?
I'm not. I'm working on it. Okay, it's not exactly
Can't
where
be
I
too
want it to be.
gravelly, otherwise it'll be dissonant in my ear.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, Natalie, it's been fantastic having you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a blast.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, where can people follow you online, learn more about the work you're doing, and give and vote on your food choices for upcoming events?
Well, I'm definitely going to need help for my next event. How do you top a bagel bar, which I've done, and then avocado toast? My whole life is on Twitter, so you can find everything about me and my business and my medium and funny tweets, I think, maybe, at N_SPORTELLI. So give me a follow, and maybe I'll follow back.
Yeah, you heard it here. Tweet her your favorite movie growing up, and maybe you'll respond to that.
Yes, I'll definitely respond to
All
that.
right, perfect.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome, thanks.
Thanks.